The clock had just crossed 11 p.m., and the city outside was slowly falling asleep. Streetlights flickered, distant traffic faded, and silence began to take over. But inside one old university auditorium, the lights were still on. The vast hall, which had been filled with applause and energy just hours ago, now stood empty. Except for one man. His name was Jax Omnix. To everyone else, Jax was invisible, just an ordinary worker. The kind of person people pass by without a second glance. During the day, students filled the auditorium with their performances, speeches, and dreams. They stood on the grand stage, chasing recognition, chasing applause. But when the crowd disappeared, Jax would quietly step in, not to perform, but to clean. Every night, he followed the same routine. He aligned every chair perfectly, wiped down the stage, and picked up the forgotten pieces of someone else's moment, crumpled notes, water bottles, sometimes even broken confidence left behind in silence. He never complained. He never rushed. There was something calm, almost respectful, in the way he worked, as if he understood the weight of that stage better than anyone. But there was one thing Jax never rushed past. The piano. It stood at the center of the stage like a forgotten kink of it, in a thin layer of dust, barely touched except during special events. Most people didn't even notice it anymore. But Jax, every single night, without fail, he would slow down as he approached it. Sometimes he would stop. Just for a moment. Not to play. Just to look. His fingers, rough from years of labor, would hover slightly above the keys but never press them. It was as if there was a line he refused to cross. A boundary between who he was and who he once dreamed of being. No one knew this about him. No one knew that Jax didn't always belong to silence. Years ago, long before he became just a worker, Jax had a different life. A life filled with sound, with rhythm, with possibility. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous, but he had something powerful belief. A belief that one day he would sit on a stage, not to clean it, but to un italiano. Back then, music wasn't just a hobby for him. It was his escape. His voice, his way of saying everything he couldn't put into words. He would spend hours practicing on a worn-out piano in a small, dimly lit room, repeating the same melodies until they felt like part of him. Every note carried a piece of his story, his struggles, his hopes, his silent battles. But life doesn't always follow the script we imagine. One unexpected turn. One moment of responsibility. One situation he couldn't walk away from. And everything changed. Jax had to let go. Not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. Dreams don't always disappear in loud, dramatic ways. Sometimes they fade quietly, replaced by duties, by survival, by the weight of reality. And that's exactly what happened to Jax. The piano was no longer his future, it became a memory, something he carried inside, but never touched again. Years passed, the world moved on, and Jax became exactly what people saw in ordinary worker. But here's the strange thing about dreams. They don't die easily. They wait. Silently, patiently, deep inside you. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment to wake them up again. That night felt different. Jax didn't know why. Nothing had changed on the outside. The same empty hall, the same dim lights, the same quiet routine. But something inside him felt unsettled. As he moved across the stage, cleaning like he always did, his eyes kept drifting toward the piano. Not casually, not habitually, but intensely, as if something was pulling him toward it. He tried to ignore it. He focused on his work, picked up trash, adjusted chairs, wiped the floor, but the feeling didn't go away. Instead, it grew stronger. Finally, he stopped. For the first time in years, he didn't just pause near the piano. He walked toward it. Slowly, each step felt heavier than the last. Not because of fear, but because of what it meant. Because deep down, he knew if he touched those keys, even for a second, something inside him would change. He stood in front of it. The auditorium was completely silent. No audience, no applause, no expectations. Just him. And the piano. His reflection stared back at him from the polished surface. Not the young dreamer he once was, but a tired man shaped by years of responsibility. For a moment, doubt crept in. What's the point? His mind whispered. But then, something stronger answered. What if this is your moment? His hands slowly lifted. They hovered over the keys, just like they had every night before, but this time, they didn't pull away. They trembled, not from weakness, but from everything he had buried for so long. Memories. Regret. Hope. Memories. A single note echoed through the empty hall. Soft. Imperfect. But real. Jax froze. It had been years. Years since he last allowed himself to feel that sound. That connection. That part of himself he had locked away. For a second, it felt overwhelming, but then something unexpected happened. He didn't stop. Another note followed. Then another. Slowly, uncertainly. A melody began to form. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. Each note carried something deeper than skill. It carried truth. The kind of truth you can't fake. The kind that comes from lived pain, from silent endurance, from years of holding everything inside. And as the music grew, so did something else. Courage. For the first time in a long time, Jax wasn't just existing, he was expressing. The empty auditorium no longer felt empty. It felt alive, as if the walls themselves were listening, as if the stage finally recognized him. But Jax didn't know something. He wasn't alone. Somewhere in the shadows, someone had heard that first note, and they had stopped, listening, watching. Because what was happening on that stage was not ordinary, not even close. And by the time Jax would realize that someone was there, everything was about to change. The sound of the piano lingered in the air, soft, raw, and deeply human. Jax Omnix didn't notice the world around him anymore. His fingers, once hesitant, were now moving with a quiet confidence as if they had been waiting years for this exact moment. Every note he played wasn't just music. It was a release, a story unfolding without words. But in the far corner of the auditorium, hidden in the shadows near the back row, someone was watching. A young woman had entered the hall moments earlier, expecting nothing more than silence. She had forgotten her notebook after late rehearsal and came back to retrieve it. But instead of an empty stage, she found something she couldn't explain. She stood completely still. At first, she thought it was a recording, but no recording could feel like this. There was something different about the way the music moved. It wasn't perfect, yet it was impossible to ignore. It carried emotion in a way that made her chest tighten, like it was speaking directly to something inside her. She slowly stepped closer, careful not to make a sound, her eyes fixed on the stage, and then she saw him. Not a performer. Not a student. Not someone dressed for the spotlight. Just a worker wearing a simple uniform, standing under a dim light, playing like the world depended on it. Her brows furrowed in confusion. How is this even possible? She whispered to herself, because what she was witnessing didn't match the image in front of her. This wasn't ordinary. This wasn't practice. This was something else. Like on stage, Jax had completely lost track of time. The music had taken over. Every suppressed emotion, every missed opportunity, every sacrifice he had made it, all poured into the melody. His breathing grew heavier, his movements more expressive. It was as if he wasn't just playing the piano anymore. He was confronting his past. And for the first time, he wasn't running from it. The melody began to rise. From soft and uncertain to strong and undeniable. It echoed across the empty seats, filling every corner of the auditorium with a presence that demanded to be felt. The young woman felt her eyes sting. She didn't even realize when it happened, but tears had begun to form. Not out of sadness, but recognition. Because deep down, she understood exactly what that kind of music meant. It meant pain that had been carried too long. It meant dreams that refused to die. It meant courage, the kind that shows up quietly, without permission, and changes everything. And then, Jax played a final note. It rang out longer than the others, lingering in the air before slowly fading into silence. His hands stopped. The room went still again. But this time the silence felt different. He exhaled deeply, his shoulders dropping as if a weight had finally lifted off him. For a brief moment, he just sat there, staring at the keys. Then reality hit. "What am I doing?" he muttered under his breath. The doubt returned instantly. Stronger than before, he quickly pulled his hands away, stepping back as if he had done something wrong. His eyes darted around the empty hall, half expecting someone to be there. To judge him, to question him, and that's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to silence. A single, soft clap. Jax froze. His heart skipped a beat. He slowly turned around. There, standing halfway down the aisle, was the young woman. Her hands were still slightly raised, as if she wasn't sure whether to continue clapping or not. Her expression wasn't mocking. It wasn't confused anymore either. It was amazed. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The distance between them felt heavy. Then she took a step forward. "That," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, was not normal. Jax immediately looked down, uncomfortably. "It's nothing," he replied quickly. "I was just trying something." But she shook her head. "No," she said, stepping closer. "That wasn't trying. That was real." Jax didn't respond. Because deep down, he knew she was right. But accepting that truth felt dangerous. "Why are you hiding?" she asked gently. The question hit him harder than anything else. He looked at her, confused, defensive. "I'm not hiding," he said. But even as he said it, it didn't sound convincing. She walked a little closer, her eyes steady. "You play like someone who's been carrying this for years," she said. "People don't just sit down and do that. So I'll ask again, why are you hiding?" Jax stayed silent, because there was no simple answer. How do you explain years of sacrifice in a single sentence? How do you explain choosing responsibility over passion, survival over dreams? He looked back at the piano. "I had my chance," he finally said quietly. "I let it go." She didn't interrupt. "I had responsibilities," he continued. "Things that mattered more than this." His voice wasn't bitter. It was calm, almost accepting. But there was something underneath it, something unresolved. The young woman nodded slowly. "I understand that," she said, "but that doesn't explain why you stopped completely." Jax frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, gesturing toward the piano, "you didn't lose this. It's still here. I just heard it. So the real question is, why did you decide you don't deserve it anymore?" That question landed differently, because it wasn't about circumstances. It was about belief. Jax didn't have an answer, not a real one. And for the first time in a long time, he felt exposed. Not judged, but seen. The young woman took a deep breath. "You know what the hardest part is?" she said. "It's not failing. It's convincing yourself that you shouldn't even try again." Jax looked at her. Something about her words felt uncomfortably accurate. "I'm not saying you have to change your life overnight," she continued. "I'm not saying you have to quit your job or chase some impossible dream. But what I am saying is this." She paused. "Don't bury something that's clearly still alive." Silence filled the space between them again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of thought, full of possibility. Jax glanced at the piano once more. For years, it had been nothing more than a reminder of what he lost. But now, it felt different. It felt like a choice. He took a slow breath. I wouldn't even know where to start, he admitted. The young woman smiled slightly. That's the easiest part, she said. She turned and pointed toward the stage. You already started. Jax followed her gaze. The piano stood there, exactly where it had always been, but somehow it didn't feel distant anymore. For the first time in years, it felt within reach, and in that quiet moment, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, because courage doesn't always look like a grand action. Sometimes it looks like a man standing in front of a piano, deciding not to walk away this time.